I welcome everybody. We are back. It is now, I guess this would be 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, although it is 8 a.m. Pacific where I am, and who knows what it is where you are right now. But we're all happy to have you here, and I'm delighted to introduce our first keynote of the conference, Alenda Chang. Alenda is an amazing colleague and a good friend who I've known for quite some time. And I think some of the real hallmarks of Alenda's work are that she is a truly interdisciplinary scholar who takes the science seriously, but also takes the humanities series seriously, and is able to bring these two things kind of together in her work, which is really trying to reconcile the nature of the environment and the games that we play. And her book, which is a real landmark study of the environment in digital games, playing nature, really consigned itself to the realm of the digital. And I think one of the really exciting things about this keynote is Alenda is going to start showing us how the work that she began in playing nature also can apply to tabletop games that we play and talk about today. So I'm just delighted to really have you here, Alenda, at Generation Analog. I think you're going to add so much to this conversation around green and show us so many paths forward in our understanding of both the environment and the games we play. So I invite everybody to give Alenda a big round of applause, and I'll remind you also to hold your questions till the end, put them in the Q&A, and we will go about addressing them at that point in the talk when we've basically had a moment to sort through the Q&A. So without further ado, Alenda, welcome to Generation Analog.
Yay, thank you. Thank you so much, Erin, for that introduction. Sorry, I had to run and close the door. So I'm really excited to be talking to everybody, and I want to thank all of the editors and conference organizers for all the work that they've done to plan this amazing conference. I've attended before, but it's nice to be able to talk. And um, I was really hustling for this past couple of weeks trying to play all these games that I've acquired. Like a lot of you probably recognize this. I love to buy things. I don't always have time to play them all, so it would sort of force me to go ahead and actually play a lot of the titles that I had accumulated. So thank you for that. Um, okay, so let me go ahead and share my slides. And I'll try to keep this to, 30 minutes so we have time to really chat. Oops. Uh, okay. Let me know if you have any trouble seeing things. Okay, so I'm not actually talking about these games, but I thought it was a good depiction of the cozy cutthroat binary that I'm gonna toy with. Regreening is the one on the right. It's not even actually out yet, but I thought it would be fun to put a game where you can actually hug trees against this other game that Ed actually introduced me to called Trees Hate You, where they're out to get you. And those are both digital games, so that's why I'm not talking about them very much. But if you're interested, you can go check it out on Steam. I think Regreening advertises itself as a soil punk fairy tale, whatever that is. Um, so I'm excited to be talking about analog games. I'm definitely an aficionado. I really kind of amass them as a hobbyist and like to play them with friends, but I haven't written about them extensively. So this is, like Aaron was saying, a chance for me to start to, flex my wings here. But I think I'm actually offering a lot of provocations and sort of avenues for further research that I'm hoping others will take up. And, if you're interested, there's that call that's associated with this theme for analog game studies that I'm editing. So, I hope we're all going to learn from each other, and I'm sure you guys are more experts than I am in this area. So for those of you who don't know me, I am mostly known for writing about digital games in terms of their environmental content. As Aaron mentioned, I wrote a whole book about the ecology of games, meaning, the ways in which games mimic experimental systems that we see in science, allow us to play with factors that we couldn't easily change in real life, And I was, and I still am really interested in how games in general dramatize scalar relationships, non-human relationships, and environmental processes. And really in everything from apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic scenarios to casual farm games, right? And I actually didn't look a ton at serious games. So um, since playing nature, I've actually been very preoccupied with more of the environmental context of the game industry. So, been writing about things like the footprint of cloud gaming, um, about developer activism around climate issues, and even the sort of thermodynamic realities that are coming for um, all kinds of play from land tournaments to real world sporting events like a certain sporting event that is happening now. Um, so even though I'm going to focus primarily on analog games in this talk, I do want to suggest that a lot of the theories and ideas that have been generated or developed over in the non-analog game studies world do pertain to analog games. Although analog games also, I think, might have a particular or privileged relationship to materiality that will come in handy. Okay, so just to kind of, flex a little bit of that, the things that we can learn from what's already gone by, I wanted to play on this cozy cutthroat binary, which I was just really brainstorming when I made up the title for the talk. And it's not surprising that we find a lot of the usual tropes or cliches about nature in analog games, just as we do in digital ones. And so, as the title alludes to, some of these cliches essentially present nature as red in tooth and claw, or, nature is the merciless force against which players must strive. And so, I think, here you could put games that are about survival of the fittest, or games of attrition, or predator-prey dynamics. And so, in this camp, I would put maybe something like Meltwater, which is described, as you can see, as a game of tactical starvation, um, two player, right? And you're you're fighting with another player over Antarctica in the wake of a really devastating nuclear war. And so the oceans are now radioactive, um, and fighting itself produces toxic dead zones. So I actually just played this with my son a few nights ago. And so you can see all the hexes with the black dot are now dead zones. Um, Either because of the ocean radioactivity or because of fighting. Um, and so as the game progresses, both players who are representing the US and the USSR are faced with fewer and fewer uncompromised tiles on which to host their civilian populations, soldiers, and stockpiles. And so, maybe this fits, but we could quibble a little bit with calling this a cutthroat nature game because the meltwater in the game is actually a source of clean water. So the icy tiles that you can see are darker blue, um, can actually host more people because they're cleaner. And everything that's been poisoned, like the ocean, is actually a result of human activity. So yeah, we could maybe debate this in Q&A, but again, humans are nature, right? So something to think about. So maybe what else in this category? I was thinking something like Forbidden Island with its sea level rise mechanic would maybe fit more comfortably because whether or not the island is consumed by the sea is really not a question of if, but just when, right? We could include things like kelp or evolution climate with their interspecies dynamics. Evolution climate, I guess, would embody competitive nature most obviously when you choose the carnivore kind of evolutionary route for a species, right? But there's also a sense that, regardless of diet, that one species loss is likely going to be another species gain because of these temperature fluctuations that can happen from round to round as the climate um, also changes in the game. And in fact, that's actually why I would include something like photosynthesis in this category. Although aesthetically, right, it's very serene. In this game, one tree's sun is another tree's shade, with the taller trees, depending on the sun angle, blocking smaller trees from getting light. And in terms of the game's mechanics, this prevents players with trees in the shade from collecting all important light points that are used to plant, grow, and harvest more trees for the points that eventually win you the game. Um, and you have something going on similarly with, sorry, this is more of a illustration of what that might look like. You have a similar thing going on with the game Coral, even though it's in the ocean, it's simulating a competition for sunlight by different coral species building on each other. And what I really love about this game is that to score it, you actually have to really look down on the coral reef that you've built, and count the number of exposed faces for your species to get your point total. So it's a nice inversion of the usual axis. So it turns out, there's a lot of nature themed games could fall into this category because they're leaning into zero-sum mechanics or at least resource limitation based on environmental conditions. And we could argue that that is as it should be if we're trying to teach people about excessive consumerism or finite resources, the reality of sharing a planet. As they say, there is no planet B. Um, but what about the other category that I mentioned in my title, which is seemingly on the total other end of the spectrum from a game like Meltwater? Um, and I'm talking about the really countless cozy nature games that promise soothing blue and green tones, um, and companionable, soft focus aesthetic bordering on the edge of kitsch, and sometimes non-competitive or collaborative play. I actually was just on vacation last week in the Pacific Northwest and went to one of my favorite game stores in Washington State, and I always just to prevent myself from spending way too much, I just take pictures. And so this is actually a very curated collection of the titles that I wanted to buy but couldn't. So whether it's the stock exchange or Plantopia or Ouch, there's some really there's just always so many more than I could possibly play. Um, and actually, so in my own home collection, these probably represent these kinds of nature games represent the bulk of my purchases because naturally I just lean in that direction. So in my spare time, I'd just rather kind of mellow in the green and golden hues of Morels, which is one of my favorite games, or the furry cuteness of Everdell, rather than stress over nuclear fallout. And so the immediate question that springs to mind is what makes something cozy? I kind of wonder how subjective is that? Is it possible that one man's cutthroat is another man's cozy? And I've kind of been wrestling with this on many occasions, and I actually decided to design and teach a course on cozy games this fall, in part to kind of test this out with students. And I've also been lucky enough to pick Melissa Kagan's brain about this. She taught her own course on cozy games not too long ago, and while most of the titles on her syllabus were digital, um, she actually included a game that was sorry, this is like the worst screenshot with the pause button. I'm sorry, Melissa. Um, she included a game designed by undergraduate and graduate students at WPI in their interactive media and game development program, and it's called Memoirscape. And in this, players were invited to enter a room that's designed to look like the bedroom slash office of a fictional professor at WPI, Dr. Julia Adler, who was experimenting with memory technology back in the 80s. And so clues in the office kind of entice you to reconstruct what happened in the fateful summer of 86. And I'll come back to this later because interestingly, the designers characterize it as an anti-escape room. And if you're interested just in Melissa's work on cozy games and on Memoirscape, you can actually look up her presentation about these things at the Educator Summit at GDC last year. So you could just go to GDC Vault and look it up. So Melissa's class actually used the Project Horseshoe 2017 report on cozy games as their textbook. You can find this online, and I think it's become a real reference point for a lot of people. And most famously, the report, sorry about the wall of text, um, it itself says that coziness refers to how strongly a game evokes the fantasy of safety, abundance, and softness. And I thought it's worth kind of going through some of these just to be clear on what coziness might mean. So safety, right? A cozy game has an absence of danger and risk. In a cozy game, nothing is high risk. There's no impending loss or threat. Familiarity, reliability, and one's ability to be vulnerable and expressive without negative ramification all augment the feeling of safety. And so, to maximize safety from a design standpoint, activities should be voluntary and opt-in so that players don't feel the threat of coercion. Abundance is interesting. It's kind of referring to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, all the lower level needs are being met, and so cozy games are providing space to work on the sort of higher order needs. Um, and I think, you know, there's some overlap here that we could explore with there's some recent sort of progressive um, economics plans that use this word abundance. If you're familiar with the book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, that's called Abundance, trying to get, progressives to move past a sort of scarcity mindset. And so I don't know, I'm not ready to talk about that necessarily today, but I do think it's interesting that these converge. And then the last component of softness, cozy games use strong aesthetic signals that tell players they are in a low stress environment full of abundance and safety. So gentle, comforting stimuli where players have a lower state of arousal but can still be highly engaged and present. And there's often here an intimacy of space and emotion with a slower tempo and manageable scope. So I think, these aspects of coziness are really interesting. Um, the report also says that cozy games frequently employ a tend and befriend mechanic, right, which allows for experiences of gift giving, of reciprocal kindness, even grief. And so in the digital realm, right, we have, uh, you know, um, things like Animal Crossing New Horizons. Um, this is not it, actually, sorry, which was the darling of the pandemic years. And also one of my personal favorites is Spiritfarer. In the analog universe, one of my favorite cozy games is this one called Morels, which I mentioned earlier. And Two Lanterns Games markets this as quote unquote strategic foraging and feasting for two. And so maybe it's because I've always felt like I'm part Hobbit, but I really love this game. And what I would love about it is the simplicity and also the implied movement. So gameplay is meant to simulate a walk in the woods. So you can see there's like kind of a row of in the middle that is um, that you cycle cards into and out of based on player actions. And so the idea is that you're strolling through the woods and kind of looking and foraging for different kinds of mushrooms. Some are more high value than others. And then you want to cook batches of them, in a skillet, preferably with butter or with cider for maximum points. And this can be done by day or by night. And so, mostly it's cozy elements in this game. Um, Although there is one poisonous mushroom, the destroying angel, which fortunately can kill you in real life, but in the game, all it does is downsize your hand. So people actually find that useful. Um, so now, because I'm interested in nature and ecology, um, if when I start thinking about cozy games, I start wondering how, nature, ecology, those discourses intersect with the generic conventions of cozy games. So I've been wondering for a long time, right? For instance, is coziness limited to domestic or interior spaces, right? Like built environments that are snug and orderly. And I think of the Scandinavian concept of hygge, right? Um, and I think a lot of cozy digital games fit that mold, right? I'm thinking of Unpacking. There are others that take place entirely or almost entirely in the outdoors, like Cozy Grove. And so the again, to go back to the Project Horseshoe report, writers of that report are careful to stress that coziness is adjacent to, maybe even overlapping with, but not the same as games featuring small worlds and homes, among other things, or cute, or all these kinds of descriptors. And so they remind us that small worlds can also be threatening, needy, or intense, and homes can trigger feelings of stress and great responsibility. Um, so interestingly, when Melissa Kagan's students designed Memoirscape, I think I had mentioned they eventually settled on an escape room that wasn't an escape room. So instead of being compelled by a timer, players were able to explore the space at their leisure. And it just reminded me that many years ago, I worked with a group of environmental science master's students who wanted to leverage game mechanics to teach kids about ecology. So that, and they wanted it to be outdoors, right? So we eventually came up with this concept for an outdoor escape room, which is kind of like head scratchy, like what would that be? But I think it's a really interesting provocation to think about what that would be. In their case, they actually stuck to the conventions of escape rooms by creating physical boundaries in the outdoor space. So they strung up sheets between trees to kind of create that sense of being in a space. They used timers, they used puzzles, etc. But the primary innovation was still there, which was that the natural environment was itself the room, right? And I think so, Memoirscape, Branch Out, which was the master's project, these were all kind of interesting borderline cases that I think start to point us in the direction of what might make analog games a special vehicle for cozy nature play. And already, you could argue that analog games are much cozier than digital ones because you've got face-to-face interaction around a table or a board or cards. And in addition to co-presence, you have the tactility of physical assets, which is very important. You have snacks. So, a lot of things to consider. Um, so, beyond this kind of blurry, cozy cutthroat binary, which I don't think is really a binary, that I've been playing with in this talk. What other methods or concepts can we start to bring in, right? And are there approaches that are particularly helpful for looking at analog games and nature? And so, as I've already started to suggest, I think one approach would be paying a lot of attention to the material assets of games that we play. I've been doing this for digital games for a while now and for game infrastructures, but it's actually a much heavier lift to do this for digital games, like uh, assets on marketplaces that are 3D modeled. It feels much less material than like a token, a wooden token or something like that, or a plastic token. So with analog games, I think materiality seems straightforward, but a lot of interesting work remains to be done. For example, I think, not just assessing the analog game industry's carbon footprint, but also evaluating the discourse around it, especially when so many titles are capitalizing on nature-themed gameplay. So it's not uncommon now to see games advertised as both environmentally conscious in theme, but also in their production. I think this is the philanthropy or community initiatives section of the Blue Orange Games website, which, in the first paragraph happily reports that for over 10 years, they've planted 2 trees for every one used in their wooden games. And I'm kind of singling them out just because I was in REI recently, which is, the home of outdoorsiness as an aspirational lifestyle. And and 2 games were prominently featured next to the other kids' camping items, and both were by Blue Orange. One was photosynthesis, which we've already seen, and the other was Planet, which you see here, which kind of has the tagline, "A world is taking shape in the palm of your hands." I played this recently also with my son, and so you can see there's like a magnetic hex kind of ball that is your planet, you're not working on the same planet. You're parallel constructing your own planets, and you're kind of trying to pick up various terrain tiles to maximize the number of species that you can acquire by the end of the game that give you points. Um, I think it's less interesting, maybe the play that is happening in Planet, but I'm more interested in the fact that these two games are in REI next to the thermoses and the beef jerky and whatever. Like, what is it? What is it advertising, or what is it saying? Is this something you're going to take on your camp out, or what? So we might also look at legacy games or games that are purposefully designed to change in permanent ways over the course of gameplay. Um, I just, I feel bad plugging something that I've edited, but it is relevant. So in 2017, Braxton Soderman, Jesse Costantino, and I co-edited a special issue of the Journal of Gaming in Virtual Worlds on the warm and fuzzy topics of permadeath and precarity. And so permadeath in games is, referring to, games like roguelikes or arcade games where you only have one life to live, and where player death means game is over. Um, and sometimes, right, like even the generated world is irretrievable. So like I have Don't Starve here and Minecraft hardcore mode, right? And precarity drew in more social concerns about labor and about the precariat class, environmental exposures and instabilities. And so, in the issue, we tried to outline four forms of permadeath in games that I think are worth still watching for. They were environmental, financial, material, and embodied. And here, maybe the environmental and material are the ones worth lingering on, especially for analog games. So, if material permadeath is, permanently altering or destroying something, like mutilating or modifying physical game assets, which you do in like Seafall. I think I broke my friend group when I bought this game and tried to make them play it. I think we got through the setup round and then just didn't get much further because it's very complicated. Um, so what might these ripped up cards, stickers, Sharpie marks, and so on signal in terms of broader endings, right? So sometimes it's like in this game, it's a new general or a line of descent that's ended, resources that are used up, a planet in crisis. And so as we kind of argued in our issue, right, permadeath mechanics have always heightened the stakes of play, but they haven't always been considered in this light as indicative of wider social and environmental anxieties. So materiality leads me to many more avenues of research, and one is actually um, eco-modding, and I'm thinking of Kira Bohaniki's excellent article in Ecozona about eco-mods in digital games, mostly for Skyrim. Um, and I think eco-modding can be more interesting and more freeform than legacy mechanics. I found it useful, really useful from a kind of pedagogy standpoint. If any of you are teaching classes and might want to incorporate this, what I have often done, like for example, in winter 2024, I taught a class on green games. And on day one, we usually play a bunch of naturey analog games. And then I asked them to basically mod Cards Against Humanity, which is infamously broy, and to design their own prompt and response cards for it, except to take literally the premise that they are against humanity. So, um, this is kind of uh, you know, a little bit of a riff on I don't know if you've heard of Feminist Cards Against Humanity, right? Rachel Rayner has a sanitized Cards Against Humanity set and also this modded set. And there are others that you can find like on the Ladies Against Humanity Tumblr. Anyway, but this exercise that I do with my students, I think, is interesting because they could opt to inhabit a really deep misanthropy, but most don't. Some of them use it to express kind of climate anxiety or grief, but interestingly with a comedic edge because they know it's Cards Against Humanity, right? And you're supposed to laugh, even if you're crying, right? So I just wanted to give you some examples. I went and dug up the cards and kind of, made some responses. So here's some. Got Elon Musk's newest company is dedicated to tackling issues arising from the Green Party. Um, in 2070, the last cow will be extinct. I always knew the world would end by late stage capitalism. These are my favorites. I talked to my grandparents about e-waste. Now I'm banned from Thanksgiving dinner. I was having a great day until I remembered Elon Musk. So Elon is figuring prominently. So, once they make enough of the prompts and possible answers, they actually try to play the game and see and kind of dwell in the discomfort of like, is this something that's funny? Like, haha, or not? Is it productive? And I think it is productive. Um, okay, and another avenue of material slash formal research that I really hope folks like you will be working on or already working on are, looking at how analog games are moving into and out of the digital world, and what does or doesn't change based on that. So, we see this with Scrabble, which was reinvented as Words with Friends, or um, Monopoly, right? Even the small game Morels, which I really loved, I've discovered recently, was kind of ported to the digital by Mosspark Games and turned into this game you can play locally or online. This is what it looks like as a computer game. Um, and one of the games that, I saw in the game store last week was this, which you may recognize, the board game version of Stardew Valley, which I didn't get, but I have lots of questions about how this works. Okay, so all of this is to say, it's really interesting when we can look beyond sort of the skin of these games at their material, formal, and generic experimentation. Um, and, I've focused a lot on cozy games because I'm just obsessed with them, but I did want to address the common criticism of cozy games that they're basically overly maudlin, right? And a bit self-serving. But I found a great Digger paper from 2003 by Dr. Bettina Bodie with a great name. It's called Soothing Affect or Neoliberal Indoctrination, Cozy Games and Agency. And just to kind of give you the lowdown, she's arguing that it's not neoliberal indoctrination, it's actually that cozy games actually afford something called cozy agency, in which you can escape from anxieties over deprived agency under neoliberal society. So I invite you to go take a look at that if you're interested. So, this might explain, those kinds of cozy agency arguments, maybe that it explains these weird subgenres of cozy games like cozy apocalypse or cozy catastrophe games, where it's actually the end of the world that provides the convenient starting conditions for a more relaxing and circumscribed way of life, right? Um, and I think there's just a lot of room to articulate these digital analog crossovers or even analog real world crossovers. So not just in terms of the games themselves, but in terms of how we play them, right? And I was actually thinking of Noah Wardrop Fruin's really excellent recent book on playing Animal Crossing New Horizons with his kids during the pandemic. Um, as a disabled dad with really severe mobility and energy limitations. And I found it a really moving read and one unlike any kind of academic game studies book I've read, right? Which is really bringing the sort of personal experience of playing a game into the examination of the game itself. And also not just having one take on it, but sort of having a take that changes over time based on, uh, circumstances. Um, so there's, this kind of hybridity. I'll come back to hobby crossover in a second, but this also happened last week. I played Pikmin Bloom, which is sort of like Pokemon Go or Harry Potter Wizards Unite. It's one of those ARG mobile games. Um, so Nintendo and Seattle Aquarium had been advertising this kind of mini walk hybrid play experience where you could go down to the Seattle Aquarium and play the game and get special things like a, gold seedling for the Ocean Pavilion. Um, and so I was kind of expecting more, but other than this billboard, which is funny and punny, um, the only things that you were kind of supposed to look for were these, um, I don't know if you can see it here, but like they had these weird plastic um, figurines of Pikmin and like flower nectar that were hidden in various places. And so it was sort of scavenger hunty, but there was no reward for finding them really, other than satisfaction. So I don't know, there's a lot of room to think about these experiences, and I think they're only going to become more common. All right, so to go back to hobby crossover, um, I think uh, I invited Brent Povis, who made Morels, to actually be a guest during a listserv discussion in March 2020. I think Aaron was part of that, and he had this really long post where he did his own poll of whether or not the players of three games, Morels, Parks, and Wingspan, actually exhibited some kind of real world behavior change or perspective change as a result of playing the games. And he calls this hobby crossover. And so he was really delighted to get a lot of responses. And, for Morels, a lot of them said that they had, in fact, done a lot more with mushrooms. There's one person who says, I don't think I'd actually ever go actually mushroom foraging because I wouldn't trust him, myself not to pick a fatally poisonous mushroom, but that Burrell's had changed their grocery store and cooking experience, and that they get a kick out of sauteing up some mushrooms that I've seen in the game. And I think these kinds of crossovers are what I'm more and more interested in. And I feel like analog games really invite that kind of discussion and invite that kind of analytical perspective. So I'll just wrap up because I know we're running out of time. Sorry. Um, and so we can, I think, learn a lot about these games by turning an analytical eye toward nature-themed games and asking if the ecological processes and actors are actually foregrounded in a meaningful way or if they're just window dressing. This is just a random slide because one of the random things that I've been obsessing over is whether or not the Magic the Gathering Phyrexian oil slick aesthetic is actually a stand-in for fossil fuels. So maybe we can talk about this in FTG. I know it's alien goo, but we can talk. And then the case of cozy games, which I spend a lot of time on, I think makes it clear that um, you know, environmental analog games don't just have to teach us about photosynthesis or evolutionary adaptation to elicit really meaningful interactions and affects. And I think, this is a dimension that in environmental studies has often been pushed too far into the background behind science and technology considerations. Um, and so I think I'll just stop there and we can have a nice discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda. Let's all give Linda a big round of applause. That was an amazing presentation. I know there's about to be a lot of questions, so as you get them, audience, please put them to the Q&A. I'll try to get through as many of them as I can, reading them out to Linda. But before I get to this first question that we have here, I have one small question for you, which is we have a lot of designers here at the conference, and so. If you could wish for like um a cozy really tuned in um uh environmental game, tabletop game, what would that game look like?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. You mean not Morels?
Not Morels, not Morels.
Um, yeah, I haven't actually thought about that much, but I mean, I do gravitate toward um vegetation. So I feel like I do, even though I do like the furry creatures and things like that, I'm more interested in I've been interested in this upsurge in interest in plants and the humanities, like just like a wild thing. So for me, the aesthetics and also the like dynamics of biotic life that isn't necessarily animal life is really interesting. So I'd be interested in that. Um, or even like the science nerd in me is interested in like life forms that aren't often featured in games. So invertebrates, um, that kind of, or even things that are crossovers like lichens or something like that. I'm not sure you can make a sexy game about lichens, but but things that are on the one thing that's interesting is they're on very different time scales, and how would you dramatize that? So I would like games that sort of feed the intellectual, like, part, but also are aesthetically pleasing. So maybe that's not a real answer, but
No, no, I think that's good. I want to throw a bone to the designers who are like, what am I gonna make my next game about? So invertebrates and
yeah,
flora, great topics
yeah.
for games.
I was kind of crushed when like I went back to look at Brent Hovis's post to get the stuff about hobby crossover. And in the post he says like most designers don't really have like a theme in mind at the beginning, that they're just working on some kind of on mechanics or some kind of core gameplay loop. And then really far down the line, they like paste the theme on, and I was kind of crushed because I was like, "You're saying morels could have been, I don't know, like car parts or something." So I don't know. If I pushed him, he probably would say that's not quite true, but
Well, just to your point about Phyrexia, I know Mark Rosewater of Magic the Gathering. He's the lead designer at Magic the Gathering. They have two kinds of design they do. They do top-down design, where
mm,
the creative team says we want a game about this, and then they do
oh,
bottom-up design, which is mechanics first, and then they try to wrap a theme around it.
what?
Uh,
Which one was
so
it?
I don't know which one New Phyrexia was, but but it was one of the two.
And I think it was also a limited, like an optional slash limited foil, like aesthetic. So I don't know.
All right,
I
we got
don't.
a lot I could talk to you about this forever, but we have a lot of guests who have questions to ask. So I'm going to start with Kathleen Morrissey, who I think is a big fan. She writes, "Thank you for such an insightful presentation. I'm actually the co-director and producer of Memoir Scape, so it was really wonderful to hear someone discuss a project that meant so much to create. Consent was a huge factor for me in our design decisions, particularly in removing timers and unlocking doors. I'm curious to
Yay.
know how you see consent relating to your ideas of nature and coziness. In particular, how might we think about creating relationships with environments that are based less on control of extraction and more on care and mutuality?" Wonderful question.
That is a wonderful question, and I'm so excited. So the actual creator of this game is here. Um, um, that's really interesting, and also uh, because consent is a kind of um, is a concept that we associate with humans, right? With our relationships. And I know like Joseph Nguyen has been doing some really interesting work, and Bo Ruberg, around consent and in games and other sort of digital, digitally mediated relationships. Um, and um, I think it's obviously important to the construction of a cozy game because of the desire for the feeling of safety, right? Which would be bound up with the giving of consent for risks taken or whatever it is. And then I would just kind of try to expand that outward to think about, if it's a cozy nature game, right? Um, does that even apply? Or is that something that we typically we don't enroll non-human landscapes or creatures into these paradigms, right, of decision making or consent or whatever. But a lot of environmental philosophy has actually gone down that road of thinking about um, like whether it's Bruno Latour's A Parliament of Things or Ding Politic or Isabel Stengers. These are people who are sort of trying to imagine non-humans having a seat at the table. And then we can also talk about all the sort of indigenous cosmologies that regard landscapes and uh, landforms and species as living or as part of kin, right? So I would expand that question to sort of think about the naturey side of things and see if it would actually help us to reimagine a different kind of game.
That's a killer answer to that question. Thanks, Alenda. We have a few more in chat, but I'm going to remind the room that if you'd like to ask a question, the Q&A feature is hidden under the more dot 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 icon at the bottom of your screen. So just click on that, and then there should be a Q&A button in there, and you can just hit that and then submit a question to Alenda. But I'll try to find it if you put it either in the Discord or on the chat channel also. So Joe McLeod, a few minutes ago, asked, to what extent is the expansion of cozy games a attempt to appeal to women?
Oh boy. I'm not sure I know the answer to that. But I do think I don't really know about the demographics. I feel like I'm getting sucked into the vortex of the old casual games discussion, remember? Like right?
If Shira Chess was here, she'd have a lot to say about this.
Yeah. Yeah, so um I don't know. I mean, maybe it is, like kind of just the game industry trying to get more, timeshare from more people. But I mean, I think people who aren't women also enjoy cozy games and nature games, but I don't have the demographic support for those things. But I do think gender is one of the aspects that is really critical to look at. So when I'm teaching this class in the fall, I feel like I'm totally bait and switching them, which is basically all game studies classes. If you've taught them, people are like, I'm gonna play games, and then so in this case, they're so excited because they're like, I can just play cozy games for the quarter. And then I'm going to talk to them about how cozy games are actually about death and about domesticity and about gender roles and all these other kinds of things that I find interesting. And that's exactly, one of the things that we're going to pursue is like thinking about domesticity and about care, like the previous question, right? And whether or not those are gendered roles, gendered labor.
Yeah, I really liked what you were saying about domesticity at the start of the talk. I thought that is a really profound and provocative question when you asked, does it have to be within the home or can it be outside? If you want to speculate about that out loud a little more for the room, I think that'd be excellent.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've been wrestling with this, since, well, I think it started when I was playing Cozy Grove. If you haven't played Cozy Grove, it's a digital game by Spry Fox, I think. And you play as a spirit scout, so kind of like a paranormal Girl Scout or Boy Scout or whatever. And you go to this for your kind of trial, you go to this island that's haunted by spirit bears that need a little help to kind of go to the afterlife in peace, although there's one bear that resists this. And so you kind of are, uh, you know, a bit of a intermediary, like in Spiritfarer, but you're also camping. So you're also, you know, pitching a tent and gathering things from trees and resources and on the shore, you collect seashells, all this kind of other stuff. So when I started playing that game, I was really confused because it's in the name, Cozy Grove. But so I don't know. I haven't come down on this yet, but I was hypothesizing in the case of a digital game that there is a certain coziness uh to boundedness in a digital device. So I don't know if that holds water, but I'm thinking of like playing on an iPad or on a mobile device, that there's a certain amount of boundedness. So even though it's, a fictitious outdoor space, it's bounded in this screen, in this computer. and so it is artificially cozy. Um, and then in terms of analog games, I was trying to think of counterexamples of, the the common trope that analog games are more intimate and cozy and snug because you're face to face. But I was like, there's got to be ex counterexamples of like when that doesn't work and you like hate the person next to you and it's not cozy at all, right?
I mean, famously, diplomacy, as is known as the
Oh.
friend killer, because you're often conspiring by people. But there's also a classic board game called Lifeboats, where basically you're voting somebody off a lifeboat every round of the game. That's everything is trying to figure out who gets pushed into the water through vote.
I think that happened in our game of Evolution Climate, which Ed was there for, and we played with some of my colleagues. Somebody was really irritated with his partner because because she went the carnivore route and kind of destroyed him. So yeah.
Um, there's so much interesting conversation happening in the chat, especially about the people who play cozy games. So I encourage you to skim that before you bounce from the talk. But I also want to solicit the room. Are there any more questions around cozy games for Alenda while we still have her? Um, I think um, I think one of my the questions I had after this talk is the degree to which the spaces that we play games are intertwined with nature, right? Like, so you've made such a big deal in this talk about how we are part of nature and we're always producing nature. But within this model of what nature is, when we, put ourselves in a house, when we contain our games, this table in the house,
Yeah.
is that removing the game from nature or something else happening in
Mm.
that moment there?
Yeah, I haven't thought as much about kind of analog game spaces, but I think it shares commonalities with like, the man cave or the sort of gaming space, right? Instead of being the living room couch, it's more probably like a table-oriented situation. But um, yeah, I mean, I guess I do wonder about um, whether there are experiments with analog games where they're not meant to be played in that very controlled, typical environment, but that would be more environmentally context sensitive. And I think of this because sometimes I couldn't find it for this talk, but I know it exists. But I know that Google or one of the big tech companies has patents for environmentally sensitive advertising. So like using the sensors on your phone, like if they know it's like today in where I live, it's going to be really hot, right? So if they know it's going to be really hot or it's a really humid, they might start to serve you more ads for fans or for air conditioning units or whatever. So I'm like, if if companies are, using the affordances of devices for those ends, like I just wonder if we could make interesting gameplay experiences that also kind of take into account that there is an outside and that changes, right? Whether it's night or day cycles or temperature or I don't know, like I don't want to be too depressing, but like, is there an environmental disaster of some kind happening, like a wildfire in recent memory, right? That kind of thing. Even like something as simple, one of the things I love paying attention to in analog games is the who gets to go first condition.
Oh yeah.
So it's one of my favorite things, right? And so in nature games, it's always really interesting because like some of them are like, I think for a coral, it's like who touched the ocean last gets to go first. So I love that kind of thing, but I could imagine something where it was like, who last was affected by an environmental disaster or something like that of some kind, or yeah, I just or air quality, I'm interested in the things that we could be doing. And
Yeah.
that it might require like a hybrid digital analog situation, but those tend to fail a lot because you can't really fully inhabit one or the other.
I think that's an awesome answer to that question. Thank you. Christo Leon, writing from NJIT in New Jersey, says, to what extent can cozy games be understood as a metaphor or practice of decolonization? Specifically, what can their emphasis on care, community cooperation, slow play, and non-extractive relationships offer meaningful alternatives to colonial logics of conquest, optimization, and accumulation? Or do they simply repackage these systems in more aesthetically pleasing forms?
That's a great question, actually, because I think if you drill down in a lot of these games, I have a feeling that they're presenting alternatives, but it's a very mainstream alternative, and it's not decolonial in the sense of like actually representing um, deep system change, I guess. But yeah, I think ugh, I feel like I would feel more confident in saying some of these games present degrowth as an alternative, but they're not necessarily engaging with more social dimensions. But there is a lot of interesting work that is being done on this. I don't know if Kyle is here actually, but um, I have a student at Utrecht, Kyle Thompson, who does a lot of board game development and uh, futures-oriented game development that is kind of wrestling with this question of how do you translate these kinds of playful experiences into change at a meaningful level. And so I don't want to. Oh, you are here.
Yeah,
Hello.
Kyle is here.
Kyle, you can talk about this. I just read your dissertation, so I'm sending you feedback very soon. But, very good, an excellent discussion of, using Haraway to think about playing with the trouble, right? And how do you kind of use play as a way to stay with difficult topics and collectively negotiate.
Yeah, I love that. I think that thinking about, games and play as a sort of like entryway to deeper conversations is a really important thing. Not necessarily as a solution to a problem, but like a way to get that conversation going. I think that's a really beautiful sentiment.
Yeah, that's something I actually have been pointing out in some of my writings talks lately is that it seems counterintuitive to attach play to like environmental activism, but for me it's not at all because like I look at the tactics that activists are using, like skipping school for climate or gluing themselves to roads or throwing soup at the wall. To me those are very playful, right? And so I think like Kyle, I am sort of interested in the propulsive power of play. And like you said, it's not necessarily going to create the solution, but it's going to create engagement and actual dialogue where it often doesn't occur.
The conditions of possibility for a solution.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that is all the time we have. So I invite the room again to thank Alenda for sharing so much wisdom with us today. This was wonderful, Alenda. Um, is there any way that people can get in touch with you if they want to reach out if they have any thoughts on the presentation?
Yeah, they're welcome to send me an email at just my first name at ucsb.edu works.
Um, and I also want to extend a big thank you to Tiffany and Carly, our translators. You both did a wonderful job. I know it's hard work, so thank you so much for joining us and providing us the ASL for this presentation. And to everybody else, please come back in 30 minutes when we'll be back. Uh, Allow me to read the title for the next panel at 12:30 Eastern Time, Green Players. So we'll see you all then.